Hello everyone and welcome to a slightly different video today. Now unfortunately there's going to be no driving, so if that's what you're here for, go watch another video. But what I am going to be talking about is the realities and the myths and misconceptions of owning a Porsche GT product in particular, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about other Porsche products. So if you already own one, please have a listen, and if you're thinking of buying one, please do stick around because I think there's going to be a lot of information that'll be of interest to you. Now, before I start proper, there's a couple of things that I feel I need to underline. First off, all the things that I say are, to the best of my knowledge, accurate for the time and location that I'm in. Now, the time is late spring 2018, and the location is the United Kingdom. So the things that I say may be wrong for you. Please double check anything if you want to try and make a decision based on what I'm about to say. Now, this car you'll have seen on the channel before, so if you do want to see it in motion, go and watch that review. It belongs to a good friend of mine, James Dean, and he has been a serial Porsche buyer. In fact, from where I'm standing, I can see 3 Porsches owned by himself and his family. And he's had several others. He's had a 997.2 that I reviewed and the Cayman GT4 that I also did a video on with my Lotus. Now, he really loves this car and I love it too. I was speaking to him about it yesterday, and honestly, if I was going to compile a list of the top 10 cars that I've ever driven, this would be there. In fact, there's a very good chance it'd be in the top 5. So please don't think that anything I say is related to some sort of bitterness from my part about Porsche products. Now, if you're not a Porsche owner or a Porsche fan, the Porsche world is quite interesting. I deal, of course, a lot with Lotus people, and I know quite a few of them that start to froth at the mouth when you mention anything that's come from, well, anyone German, really. But the fun thing is, having in the past been a Porsche owner myself, I had a 996 and a 993, that actually there's probably a lot of Porsche owners that hate this car more than anyone else. I mean, it's automatic and it's got water in the cooling system. Ugh. But I digress. Point is, this is a brilliant car. I love it. James loves it. But it has to go. And it's going pretty much next week. Here's why. Porsche in recent times have experienced a dramatic change in the way that they do business and the way that they sell their cars. Now, I first really noticed this about 2 years ago when I was looking at buying a Cayman GT4. I didn't realise at the time that the GT4 was intended to be a limited production car. I think maybe I've seen it in a few places, but I didn't really think much of it because to me, the joy of Porsche, as opposed to, say, Ferrari, was that if you had the money and you wanted to buy one of their cars, you could. Now, as a young man, the car that I idolised more than any other, and you know what, still do, was the Carrera GT. I don't think the Carrera GT actually sold out its intended production run. And when the 918 was coming out, do you remember you had LaFerrari, you had the McLaren P1 and the 918. I recall LaFerrari selling out before it even existed and had a name, as silly as it was. P1 did the same thing because McLaren then was still very new, very hot property. But 918, even Porsche themselves told you half the order book was unallocated. People weren't going crazy for them. Years ago, I worked for a Porsche dealer specialising in older and unusual, mostly air-cooled and then GT cars. We had 3 996 GT3s sitting around. They were £35,000 each, so Mark IIs, a mix of Club Sport and Comfort Spec. No one was interested. No one was really that super keen on them. They weren't selling, and we didn't really like getting them in because they were a very difficult car to sell. Bear in mind back then that you could pick up a nice 993 for 25 grand. So, what's the point of today's video? Well, I've seen a lot of people talking about buying GT3s, GT4s, and the one question that everybody talks about is how much money am I going to lose? Because the new generation of cars, which started with the GT4, then followed with 911R, then you've got the GT3, GT3 RS, and now the GT2 RS. People are selling these when they're new for a considerably large sum over list. In the case of the GT2 RS, people are asking more than double the car's list price. So there's currently 5 GT2 RS up for sale with delivery miles, and they're around £500,000 each. Considering the list price is somewhere around £210,000 to £240,000, depending on how you spec the car, that's a lot of money someone's making on a vehicle that they've never ever driven. Now, there's a couple of reasons for this dramatic increase in prices. Now, a few years ago, particularly in the wake of the recession, classic car prices started to rise pretty quickly. You saw it in the Porsche world first with the real icons, stuff like the 2.7 Carrera RS from 1973. And I think classic cars like that are always going to be highly sought after. In the Ferrari world, of course, it was things like the F40 that led the charge. And what happens then is that the other cars around them get dragged up as well. So to take a more recent example, something like, say, the Ferrari 360 Challenge Stradale, which a lot of, say, younger people really like, well, prices of those went crazy, and that will naturally drag up the price of the regular 360 as well. The 355 saw a dramatic price increase too. And what that then does is it means that other cars that people weren't previously interested in, say the 348, their prices get dragged up as well. Not because that's the car that people wanted, but because they see prices going up on something, they think they can make a better money, so if they can't afford the car they really wanted, they go for the next best thing. So with Porsche, classic car prices started to go up very, very quickly, and then the prices of things like early GT3s and so on started to rise, and of course then you get people buying stuff like the GT4. It of course helped that the reviews of the car were absolutely glowing, and rightly so. Fantastic car that it is. So that car had a list price of around £65,000 plus options, and when it came out, people started selling these cars for, in some cases, over £100,000. Now, I think people thought that was going to carry on. People were going to buy a car that cost 65 first off, so the first person that sold it, let's say you put some decent spec on it, so you actually spent 75 on that car, and you sold it for £100,000, let's say you made £25,000. I think there's a lot of people that then bought that car and thought they were going to be able to sell it for £125,000. That didn't really work. I think there's a lot of people that bought that car as the second owner, thinking they were going to make easy money on it, only to realise that they couldn't. And similar things happened with the GT3 RS in particular. The RS came out, some glowing reviews, everyone decided they wanted one. Then some people decided to sell theirs for considerably more than they paid. I mean, you know, I'm not an unrealistic person, I'd like to think. The lure of making that sort of money, you know, £100,000 or more on a car you don't even have to drive. You get this car in, and you go, you know what, someone comes, if I just bought a car, if someone came to me now and said, you know what, your Lotus, I'll give you 150 grand for it. You know, I'll give you 50 grand or 100 grand even more than it's worth. I mean, I do like that car, but 100 grand's 100 grand, right? And then you look at the other things you could buy for that money, so you get the idea. The sad part is that you then have a lot of people who are the sort of people that would have bought this car at list price and would have driven it and enjoyed it, but they're no longer able to afford it. And this has screwed the market in a couple of ways, in my opinion. First off, of course, is that those genuine enthusiasts have a much harder time getting access to the cars. If they haven't been able to please their dealer, and this is a topic I'm going to get onto in a minute, if they haven't been able to get to that car first time round, then you know, they may not be able to afford the car at the inflated second-hand prices. And the other thing it's done is it's turned Porsche's GT products in particular from the sort of car which you could buy and experience a very normal, regular depreciation cycle into something where they're being treated as an investment and as an asset. And that's a big issue. If you go and look at the number of these for sale, and there is a huge number. I mean, to put into context quite how odd the market is, if you go on the Porsche approved website, as I did last night, if you look up the regular base 991 Carrera a very, very good car. There are 32 for sale. That's not including Carrera 4s and S's and all that sort of stuff. There's 32 for sale. There are 37 991 GT3s. Considering this is supposed to be a much rarer, sought after, great car that people should be buying and enjoying, well, that's just not right, is it? And you then get this situation where people have all these cars and they start playing top trumps with each other. So in the case of this car, it's a car that's got the comfort seats, not that they're that comfortable, and has no cage in the back. It's a very reasonable, very livable, good spec. But then, because people are buying a car for an investment, they buy the car based on the back of what they're told is good, rather than what is actually good. In the case of GT3s, people are then told, oh, you must get it with ceramics. You must have the bucket seats. You must have the cage, the Club Sport pack, all this stuff. Things that might not actually affect your enjoyment of the car, but that you've been told you have to have anyway. Now, this is not a unique situation with Porsche. This has happened with plenty of other cars. For example, the first generation Audi R8, I looked at one at a dealer, and the car was advertised very cheaply. The reason being, it didn't have the MagnaRide, the adaptive suspension option that Audi offered. That wasn't actually a very expensive option. I think it was only something like £1,000 or so from the factory. It was not expensive. And I drove the car without the MagnaRide option, and it was fine. It was absolutely fine. But because everyone had been told you really shouldn't buy one without MagnaRide, the people that had the cars without it suddenly found themselves in a situation where they had to devalue their car considerably in order to, well, be able to sell it. So let's take this car as a particular example. Now, this car, brand new, probably cost around £112,000 or so. Now, someone bought this car and sold it to a second person who probably thought they were going to pay a lot of money for it. Sorry, who probably thought they were going to make a lot of money on it. They did pay a lot of money for it. I suspect they might have paid something like 150, maybe even 160,000 pounds, because when James bought this car, it had only about 1,000 miles on the clock. So it was hardly used for a car that had already had two owners. Now, when James saw this car, it was advertised at £135,000. He got a very, very good deal on it. He paid £125,000. Now, like a lot of people, he bought this car with the hope that he would be able to put reasonable mileage on it and not lose too much money. He did not buy this car to make money. As I stress, a lot of people don't. I think most people go into these with somewhat realistic expectations that they're not going to make money on the car. The market overall has softened considerably from 12 months ago when people were selling GT3 RSs for £250,000, and that has backed off quite a bit. Some cars have come down by over £50,000. And that leads on to my next point. So he bought this car. He took finance out, because most people buying these cars do take out finance packages, and that is important. Okay, not many people buying these cars buy them cash. So he had the car. He's had it for about 10 months, and he's put about 5,000 miles on it. So this is a car with 6,000 miles on it. Now, for a car that is just under 4 years old, or thereabouts, 6,000 miles. Not really a lot, is it? Let's be honest here. You know, I've put 22,000 miles on my Evora in about 2 years. But when he came to look at changing this car, he's looking at changing it just for, well, the change and to try something a bit different and to move on and have a different experience. We found, and by the way, when he bought this car, he actually bought it knowing that because of what it was, because of the way the finance worked, that actually his monthly payments would be quite high. What's quite high? Well, let's say between £1,500 to £2,000 a month. At the time, had he bought, say, a McLaren 570, which was a more expensive car, cash price, he actually would have been paying less. So when I say he really liked this car, I really mean that. He bought it because he wanted a GT3. Now, when he bought it, the new GT3 with the manual option had already been announced. So everyone that had one of these, we knew that basically this was one of the reasons that the prices had softened a little bit. When this car came out, it was equipped only with the PDK gearbox, and people were unsure as to whether there was ever going to be another manual GT3, as the old 997s had been, and that's always cited as one reason for the older cars being a little bit higher in value. If ever you want to understand the difference between cars for investment and what people buy new, look at Ferrari. Look at the prices of old manual Ferraris. Take any car where they sold both. Take the 430, 360, 355, 575, not the 550, 575, and compare the prices of manual and F1 box cars. You'll pay a considerable premium for a manual. Why don't Ferrari do a manual anymore? Because people stopped buying them. And even with the new car, actually, I personally thought that it maybe be a 50-50 split between people ordering manuals and PDK gearboxes. Apparently, it's actually been much more in favour of PDK, because the people that actually do want to drive them and use them, that's kind of what they want. And if you want to take it on track, the PDK gearbox is much better. The PDK gearbox is a brilliant thing. It's a fantastic piece of engineering. So, he bought this car. We knew the new one was coming. So that wasn't a problem. That really wasn't affecting anything because everyone knew that it was on the way. This car now is worth at a dealer around £110,000, £112,000. So, looking at this purely from a cash perspective, this car has lost well over £10,000 in 10 months and 5,000 miles. That's not good. It gets worse. Because this car was bought on finance, money has been paid out, of course, every month to go towards this car. And that means that the actual money lost on this car has been, well, in excess of £20,000. Let's say that. That's a very bitter pill to swallow for anyone. I know there will be people watching who think, well, if you can afford this sort of car, that means you can afford to give away £20,000. That's not the case. That really, really isn't. And I know there's people out there who think that everyone buys every car cash, and that, you know, if you buy a Veyron, you're going to do that cash. Well, it's just not. It's not always the case for many different reasons. Some people just don't like that amount of money tied up in an asset. You know, it's just, people have reasons for doing it, but the fact of the matter remains that the vast majority of people do buy cars on finance. And that means that I believe there's a few people that have been, I wouldn't say conned because that is unfair, that is not necessarily an accurate term, but have been misled into buying GT products under the promise that they can have essentially free motoring. Now, if you manage to buy one new, that's pretty much what you've had. You know, if you'd owned this car since new, in cash terms, you've lost nearly nothing. But very few of these cars are still with their original owners. So a lot of people have lost a lot of money on these cars. And I've been there and I've seen Porsche dealers telling people, and other dealers as well, telling people, oh, get a Cayman GT4, oh, you can't lose money on that. Well, you can. And the way to lose money on it is very, very easy. Drive it. Because these cars have gotten to a certain value and they're being treated a certain way by certain people, they're being bought by speculators, not just enthusiasts. And the speculators are so obsessed with the car's condition, the mileage, the price. They're talking about it like it's a fine piece of art, like it's a fine wine or something. Yeah, the truth of the matter is that this car with 20,000 miles on it would actually probably be a much better car than with 5,000 miles on it. And I've known people do comparisons like that and have come back with that conclusion, saying that actually the car that's been used, the car that's been run in, is the much better one. I have absolutely no doubt in my mind that Andreas Preuninger, who's the head of GT department, probably is absolutely livid at the fact that the cars that he spends so much time making, you know, the best drivers' cars in the world, sit in showrooms bought by people that just want to make a bit of easy money. And this is happening with all these cars. You drive them, you lose a lot of money. Now, I hate to be the guy that just moans about stuff. Actually, that's a lie. I love to moan about things. It's awful fun, and I'm British. I'm genetically built to enjoy moaning. But what can be done to fix this sort of situation? And it is a big problem. Well, it's quite simple, really. I think, in the United Kingdom at least, that the system of allocating these cars to people is broken. It's as simple as that. Now, it is absolutely true to say that there are plenty of enthusiasts who are getting these cars from new by dealers that are good to them, who are rewarding their loyalty to the brand and to the dealer, and so on and so forth. It is also true to say that there are less scrupulous dealers who are taking the opportunity, knowing that there are people that are going to make a lot of money. When you look at something like a GT2 RS for sale, where someone stands to make £250,000 on a car, the idea that money may have changed hands in a less than traditional sense, it's not really unthinkable, is it? You know, you make that sort of money on a simple deal, and when you see that these people may have got more than one car in that way, the idea that a dealer principal or someone could have been persuaded or is maybe reserving these vehicles for their friends who are going to make lots and lots of money off them and they may benefit, well, it's not outside the realm of possibility. I mean, it's happened before. There was a case in the news in Britain where a dealer was actually sued successfully for a very large sum of money because they took someone's money for a car. It was an older car, it was a GT3 RS 4.0 when they were a new thing. And they basically said to the guy that, yes, you can have a car. They then changed their mind and actually sold the car to someone else, and he sued them because he had a contract with them. They'd actually taken his money, which Porsche are a little bit wary now about taking deposits for that very reason, and they'd sold his car on. So I have absolutely no interest in mentioning any Porsche dealers by name bar one, which is Porsche Silverstone, because they have actually been very good, very helpful, very kind, and very honest at all stages of dealing that I've seen. I've interacted very sort of gently with them and that. So they've been very, very nice. When it comes to other dealers, yeah, basically it's a case-by-case basis. I have no doubt there is a mix of them. But the truth of the matter is that I think the allocation process has gone a bit wrong. I think Porsche need to employ a system similar to that Ferrari use when they're allocating things like LaFerrari. And that's to say that you have a system where Porsche themselves get in touch with you. They have their list of the really good customers that may be referred to them by dealers. And Porsche look at them and go, okay, who are you? What have you bought? Have you used your cars? Do you enjoy them? Do you do things? Do you actually really enjoy having this car, or are you just looking to flip it? And then what they do is Porsche direct sell the car to you, and you just pick what dealer you want the car delivered to. That's how LaFerrari works. Because at the minute it doesn't. I know people have said that Porsche are trying to stop it and Porsche don't like it happening. Well, I'm afraid that's simply not true, because it'd be very, very easy for Porsche to stop it happening. All they would need to do is they go to their approved used stock list, and they find every single GT3, GT3 RS or GT2 RS, not that there's any on the approved list yet for GT2, but they are being sold privately. You find those cars that are being sold with delivery miles for massive overs, and you basically ask who the dealer was, who sold them that car, have they done it before? Yes, they have, because maybe there's always going to be extenuating circumstances. Perhaps their fortune fell apart, the house burnt to the ground, they've died, something like that. That'll always happen, but the fact of the matter is, it's very, very easy to weed out the people that are buying these cars. They're essentially car touts. That's what they are. And when it's a car that's as good as this and as fun as this, that's not right. So for Porsche to find these people will be very, very easy. Now, I'm not saying that they're encouraging it to happen, but they certainly aren't doing anything to stop it either. And there is a secondary thing that's happening at Porsche as well, which I think is possibly a little bit more worrying. The 911 lineup, and let's say for a lot of people they see the 911 as Porsche's core product. It's always been a little bit confusing if you don't know how it works, but it's only gotten more so in recent times. Now, to give you some context as to how much these cars cost, in 2005, I know someone that bought a brand spanking new C2S with quite a few options on it. It's a very, very well specified car. That cost £69,000. Now, 13 years later, a base Carrera starts at around £77,000. Now, in real terms, what does that mean? That means, well, the Carrera is about £10,000 to £15,000 more expensive than it was 12, 13 years ago. That's not massively unreasonable, but the truth is that the real price of the car has actually gone up by quite a lot. The last 911, regular 911 that I reviewed was the 991.2 GTS. That had a base price of £95,000, as tested 113. Evo magazine recently did a test with a C4 GTS. That started at £100,000 and was 120 by the time they'd finished speccing it. It meant that the cars they were comparing it with, things like the new V8 Vantage and a McLaren, weren't actually that much more expensive than the 911. Now, the 911 is an evergreen product. It will always sell, but it has become a huge amount more expensive, not necessarily by the car being more expensive, but by dealers pushing people to buy the more premium cars. The GTS started as a limited edition sort of run-out special of the 997.2. It was basically a way of Porsche saying, you know what, we're going to take a load of different options, including the power kit, which was very expensive, and chucking it together into one car, which is supposed to be kind of a little bit of an alternative to a GT3. If you didn't really want a GT3 because the GT3 was a bit too much hardcore, but you still want a really fun road 911, that's what that was. And now I've got to the stage where a GTS, and it exists in the 718 in the Boxster and Cayman range as well, is a mainstay model. So what happens now is you go to your dealer, perhaps wanting just a regular Carrera, and the first thing they try and do is talk you out of buying it. They want you to buy something like an S, or preferably a GTS, because they'll convince you that ultimately it might be the cheaper car to own. And the fact of the matter is that you might look at a Boxster thinking you can pick up one for £55,000, and then before you know it, you've specified a GTS to £75,000. That's a huge amount of money. It's not helped by the fact that the 718 in particular, not everyone is in love with. Just look at the prices of the 981 that came before it. Now, the press will tell you that, kind of indifferent engine noise aside, that the 718 is a much better car. And you might think that people buying Boxsters are maybe the sort of people that don't really care, they just want a Porsche. Well, that's true for some people, for sure. But evidently, there's enough people that really, really prefer the 981 to mean that we're in a situation pretty much where buying a 981 is just as expensive, cash-wise, as a 718, because that's what people want. And the 911 is in danger of doing a similar thing. There's lots of people that are holding on to their old cars, their 997s or Gen 1 991s, because they want that naturally aspirated engine. And again, it all relates to what people are told in magazines is best and what's preferred and everything else. And that means that you get people that are speculating with these cars, people buying them for investment, so on and so forth. And that does ruin things for the people that just want to buy them and enjoy them. There's one group of people in particular that I think have been really unfortunate. And that's those that maybe in the past only ever bought things like the Carrera S, maybe the GTS, something like that, who decided to upgrade to something like a GT3 because they were sold on this lure of, you know what, don't worry, because the monthly payment will be a bit more, yeah, for sure, but you know, you give us your nice car that you've looked after for a while and we'll give you a good price on part X and so on. You have one of these because, you know, you can drive this and you can drive it and it'll be free. You know, drive it and don't worry about it because, you know, these won't lose any money. Look at the prices, look what they've done. And it might be true that in some cases the cars haven't really lost that much money over a year or two, but that will be the cars that haven't been driven. So it's absolutely completely possible for you to have bought one of these cars on finance and you then put on the, you know, the amount of miles that you agreed, and it doesn't need to be a lot. 6,000 to 10,000 miles a year, not an unreasonable amount of miles. You know, this could be a daily driver, it really could. But you then suddenly find yourself, let's say you're the sort of person that changes car every 18 months or so, and you've gone to go and change your car at the normal rate that you would, and then actually you find out that that car that you thought you weren't really going to lose money on has lost a frightening amount of money. And I am far from a finance expert. I am a finance amateur. I have never ever bought a car on finance. I have helped people do so, and I know people that do it quite frequently, but basically, long story short, you can wind up in a situation where in order to just get rid of your car, not to purchase another one, but simply to get rid of your car, you might have to pay £30,000, more or less, really depends on the car. But it is very, very possible to wind up with an asset that you owe not just the payments on, but if you want to trade it in, you want to get rid of it, you've lost a massive amount of money. Why has the market softened over the last couple of years? And really that's a big problem. You know, it used to be that maybe if you did buy one of these cars and you were not going to do too much with it, you wouldn't lose too much money. Well, Porsche keep making them, Porsche keep selling them, and I think prices rose far too sharply. These are new cars. These are not sought after classics that people have been lusting over for 30 odd years. They're pretty new cars. And ultimately, if you're going to buy a new car that you then can't drive, what's the point? You might as well buy a classic. You might as well buy sort of anything else. And I suspect there's probably a lucky few who've used their opportunity to get a new GT product and maybe springboard into other manufacturers and go and buy other things, buy Ferraris, buy McLarens, that sort of stuff. You know, I'd love to bash Ferrari, but the truth of the matter is that as difficult as it can be to get a Ferrari, they are at least quite open and honest about the process and about who you need to be to get one. And if they tell you, yes, you can have one of these cars, you're just going to have to wait 3 years, they'll mean it, and in 3 years you'll get your car. But right now, I think the Porsche system is, well, it's a little bit broken. And that's sad, because they're making some really, really great cars. And there's just been a bit too much focus on the GT cars. What's happened, and as I pointed out earlier, the numbers of regular Carreras and things in the network is very low. There's only 65 Carrera 2S's in the Porsche approved network for 991s versus 37 GT3s. That's not right. That's absolutely not right. Dealers are focusing far too much on these cars. You walk into most Porsche dealers, they won't be very interested in selling you a regular 911 Carrera, which is tragic because it is, and has pretty much always been, a fantastic car. But Porsche is now changing. It's changing the way that it does business, and I think really it needs to look at that. Porsche, if you're listening, I doubt you are, but you need to make sure, you need to find a way of getting these cars. So at the very least, I know you can't control the second-hand market that much, but you can just try and make sure that the first people that own these are enthusiasts who will drive them. And while this situation is in place with people paying massive overs for relatively new cars, if we can find a way to let enthusiastic owners get these cars and put miles on them without it costing them, I think that is a wonderful thing. I have absolutely no issue with someone buying one of these brand new, sticking 20,000 miles on it, making their 30, 40,000 pounds, whatever it may be, and saying, I've had a great time, I've had a great experience, I've made some money out of my car and I enjoyed it. That's fine as long as you do that. But what I don't like is the people that bought it knowing they were never, ever going to drive it, never, ever going to enjoy it. I mean, just look at the latest example, the Carrera T. There's 16 for sale in the Porsche approved network, 16. The Carrera T was supposed to be quite a special, quite a good car at a more reasonable price point. You know, £85,000 rather than sort of 120, 130 or more. So why are there 16 already listed for sale, of which about 14 have price on application? Because I suspect there's a number of people that bought a Carrera T hoping and expecting it was going to do the same thing the GT products did, that they were going to make a bit of quick cash. And I don't think that's going to happen. Whether that's because people just weren't interested in the Carrera T, or whether that's a sign of something more general and people are starting to become fed up of this whole process, I really couldn't say. But I hope I've managed to kind of get my point across. If you want to buy one of these cars, please by all means do, but go in with your eyes open. And if anybody is trying to tell you that you can have one of these and, you know, have it for free, well, they're going to sell you a brand new one and you're going to get on a dealer's list. Good for you. But otherwise, I suggest doing a little bit more research. If you've stayed till the end, thanks for watching. I hope you haven't been too bored by this video. And whatever you're driving, please enjoy it. Subscribe if you haven't already. Comment below. If you've had one of these cars, whether you've had a good or a bad experience, I would love to know. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.